instead of making our health issues something bad, can it rather be an opportunity? Because this is what I'm seeing over and over again with the women I work with, is that as we consciously work with what is out of balance and discover who we actually truly are when we are not adapting ourselves and when our nervous system is rested and calm, we then step into that truth and that power that is so incredible. And imagine all of us doing that together.
The Fatigue to Flow podcast offers a deep, transformative approach to healing burnout and chronic fatigue. Going beyond surface level fixes like stress management or supplements, we explore the real roots, nervous system imbalance, harmful psychological patterns, and the mind-body connection. Chronic fatigue isn't just a condition, it's an opportunity for awakening to your greatest self. Each episode blends personal experience with practical tools. If you're ready for lasting vitality, joy, and flow, this episode is for you.
Hi, I'm Lynn Misch, and I'm here to welcome you to the Find Your Inner Calm Summit. And I want to welcome this today, Miss Kerry Magnus. And I have the great fortune of working with Kerry. She's actually one of my international speakers, and I'm so thrilled that Kerry is here. And so I'm going to have Kerry introduce herself and give you a bit of her background, her story, as to what she does as a practitioner and what she shares with her clients and why she's here on the summit today. So welcome, Kerry.
I feel like it's going to be quite tricky to keep that concise, but I'll do my best. I call myself a vitality coach. My background is I am a psychologist. And then I felt that psychology in itself was just not enough. It was too surface level for me. And so I started to delve deeper and went into hypnotherapy. And then I discovered BodyTalk, which is, if anyone knows kinesiology, it's similar in some ways, but more than. It involves a number of different healing systems, but we use the muscle testing as the basis for determining what is out of balance in the body-mind complex and for supporting the body and mind to bring it back into balance, which it knows how to do anyway. But when we're under too much stress, that capacity to come back into balance is switched off. So it's an incredible modality and works so beautifully together with the psychology. And then what happened was, so vitality coaches, because let me start from here. I work with mainly women. I do sometimes see men, but I work with mainly women who are burnt out and battling with general chronic fatigue, not necessarily chronic fatigue syndrome, or what we used to call adrenal fatigue syndrome, but even just a general state of fatigue and often battling with crashes and burnout. It usually comes along with chronic overwhelm and feeling chronically stressed. And these are very often women who have such a deep calling to make a difference in the world. They even if it just means being a mother that is being an incredible mother and who is conscious and providing the safest space she can for her children. These are women who just have so much to give, but they feel so stuck and frustrated and depressed because they are tired and overwhelmed and they just can't do what they feel they should be able to do. And so my aim is to help them to overcome that. And the beauty of it is that in the process, what we often discover is that who they thought they were wasn't actually their truth. And so in the healing process, what comes out is they discover who they're meant to be. And this goes back to me again. So I was studying my master's in psychology and I had to do a thesis on burnout. And at the time I was thinking, this sounds awfully like me. And then I decided maybe I was just projecting a little bit. And but I was definitely burning out. And by the time that I had finished my master's, I was very burnt out. I went on to work in a trauma center and then went on to work in Pollsmoor Prison, which is one of the most notorious prisons in South Africa. And I was absolutely burnt out by the end of that. And then my daughter was born and I was finally diagnosed with what was called adrenal fatigue syndrome. I don't necessarily believe in that label, I can speak to that later, but I was completely depleted. And so I wasn't able to continue working in the way I wanted to, and to bring up my daughter. And then another one chose to come along as well, which was it was a gift. But I was quite stressed having two children, 2 years apart, and still battling with my health. But the most crazy thing started to happen is that I was beginning, as I slowly got back into my work, I began to attract women into my practice who were coming with a general sense of, I'm tired, I feel like everything is out of control, it's all just too much, and I don't know what to do. And I realized that they were mirroring me. And of course they were, because that's what that was going to, it was my gift from my chronic fatigue, was to begin this kind of work with women. So that's that kind of gets to where we are now.
Really interesting. So when you really truly started to define adrenal fatigue, chronic fatigue, because there's a difference between chronic fatigue syndrome, and then there's even an Epstein-Barr syndrome that's related with the virus that can cause chronic fatigue. So the interesting thing is as you experience the chronic fatigue, adrenal fatigue, which I think is so common throughout, I know in our country, I know probably throughout the world, with the conditions that are happening, people not knowing how to really unplug from the world at large, because they are always externally motivated by the circumstances that happen around them. So and again, as you work in the throes of what you were working in, and see probably the most challenged of the human condition and spirit, because when you're working in the different places, going through your program that really enhanced your adrenal fatigue, what were the identifying symptoms that you were experiencing that you could probably share with somebody listening to this, that they might be able to identify with? What might be some of the symptoms that would be important for somebody to understand that they were going through and not sure what was happening to them?
I love that. That's a great question. So the overall blanket experience was that of exhaustion. Waking up in the morning and feeling like I hadn't had a refreshing night's sleep, even if I had 9 hours. Although, to be fair, sleep became a big problem because there's difference. Okay, so I'm going to segue a little bit. The reason I was saying I don't necessarily agree with adrenal fatigue syndrome as a label is because I believe all of these things, because I don't believe that the adrenals become fatigued. I think that the nervous system becomes dysregulated. And I think underlying chronic fatigue, Epstein-Barr, all of these things, we will find often a dysregulated nervous system. So I was in this point of a dysregulated nervous system where I was in a bit of a fight-flight state chronically, or what's actually called, it's not quite fight-flight, it's actually called functional freeze. On the surface, I look capable and fine, but underneath, I'm spinning and I'm exhausted at the same time. So I'd close my eyes to go to sleep, and it would be like a surge of adrenaline came through my body, and I was wide awake again. And my brain wouldn't stop. My brain still doesn't generally stop, but at nighttime it would keep me awake, and my body would feel so like energized is not the right word, because it's more activated.
Okay.
So it was both this activation and then this exhaustion, which is very typical of a nervous system dysregulation. I would feel dizzy and lightheaded if I stood up too quickly, couldn't think clearly, couldn't find the right words when I was trying to speak. Just generally feeling very overwhelmed by even the smallest things that happened. Lack of motivation, lack of interest. So there's almost a depressed feeling to it.
Yeah.
And in fact, a doctor did try and get me onto antidepressants. And I was saying to him that I know what depression is. This is not depression. But he didn't know anything beyond antidepressants. But I can understand why he said that, because it gets you very down, because you can't function properly. And there is this lack of joy, lack of motivation, lack of drive, while also still being strangely driven and activated internally, but it's exhausting at the same time. Yes, I'd say those are kind of the major symptoms that showed up.
So it's truly like you're never getting rested, ever, because
No,
there's all
that's
this,
exactly it.
you're in overdrive all the time. So your body is emotionally, physically, and spiritually fatigued. You're just
Yes.
exhausted. And then you shared, which I think is interesting, because you went through this really kind of period where you were working with the different really challenging individuals that I'm sure that they were in the hospitals, prisons, whatever, because they were traumatized in some respect, and they
Yes.
often act out because of that trauma. And then in turn, you've got
Yes.
problems that arose because of whatever the trauma, probably that preceded the event that happened that got them into the positions that they were in, correct?
100%. That's
Yes.
exactly.
So then you're working with, and so when you're really going to the root of that problem, those problems with those individuals emotionally, you're really looking at the spectrum of the whole mind, body, spirit in that person that's trying to navigate into the world and can't, and they're doing it in their they're dysregulating, right? They're malfunctioning because of that dysregulation in that nervous system. So they overreacted with anger, probably because of the sadness or depression or whatever state that they were in. And then they responded ineffectively to the situation that they probably ended up in the hospital or incarcerated for, correct?
Yes. So I talk about a trauma-informed personality. So the behavior that you see is generally not related to their true nature as such. If they had been in an environment from birth in which it had been held not perfect, we don't want perfect, but good enough, then they would be more aligned to their truth and to their center as such. But the bigger that difference between, so what happens is when we have trauma, in other words, when we don't feel that it is safe to be our authentic selves. And that can be as simple as feeling like we might be rejected or abandoned, neglected, whatever it might be. Then we adapt ourselves. And we do not do this consciously. In fact, it's pretty ingenious, really, how children will adapt themselves, often modeling the people around them, but also using common coping mechanisms like dissociation, which is leaving their body so they don't have to feel the feelings, and going into their heads and trying to think everything through instead of feel it. So this adaptation results in what is actually a false self, a trauma-informed personality. And then those adaptations can play out to a smaller or lesser degree or extreme. So let's say I became a chronic people pleaser. That was one of my adaptations. I needed and still need to watch myself all the time, that I like to take on everyone else's stuff, and I'm good at fixing. So I want to fix it. So there's a rescuer aspect, which is obviously also why I got into doing the work I did. So I had to be very conscious about that as well. Yeah. So these are certain ways in which our trauma-informed personality dictates our behavior and our responses that leave us feeling activated, having a stress response, because it is exhausting and it is not in alignment with our truth to constantly rescue and people please and whatever else those coping mechanisms are. Then your trauma response is just having veered so far away from that center that when a person responds from that place, it's a fight-flight response that has no frontal, there's no thinking, there's no connection to consciousness. It is an absolute amygdala hijack where they are responding because an old pattern from their past has been recreated or is happening again in the present moment, and they're responding from pure fight-flight, or what generally, if they're ending up in prison, it's a fight response, or some type of reenactment of the past experience. Often, actually, there's a theory that we call mastery, they're often unconsciously trying to master their old trauma as well. They don't realize that they're doing it, but it's like, this time I'm going to get it right. This can be smaller ways in which we reenact our trauma, like even seeking abusive relationships, for instance, after having been in an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
So there's various ways in which our trauma-informed personality dictates our behavior and how we then respond to anything that happens in our present moment, because we're not responding to the actual neutrality of that present moment. It's being impacted by the patterns from the past, and the meaning that we give it is all based on that, and not this person who is my true self in this moment in the present.
And I think that hence the discussion about chaos to clarity, right? Or calm, is that when you learn to live in chaos, you gravitate toward that chaotic experience because that becomes comfortable, because that's what you understand. That's what your belief system has learned to regulate, right? And so then you tend to, rather than going toward, like you said, being a people pleaser, and you have to really set those boundaries in place, because you'll gravitate back toward that people pleasing experience because that's a known within your belief system in your brain. So your brain triggers that, right? I think it's from the hippocampus to the amygdala that fires that syndrome, that energy pathway, but it doesn't.
It would be the limbic brain. So
Brain,
I can't tell exactly which part of it. Yeah.
But I think what it does is like a reentry phenomena. It keeps cycling through. So it's in that is like a pattern that gets set with brain waves. And it's desynchronous, right? I mean, it's like an abnormality. I look at it from the perspective, I was a cardiac nurse, and there's a term called atrial fibrillation. And what'll happen is the heart resets that electrical current in that abnormal pattern because of whatever's happening to it. If there's a disease process, whatever has occurred in that cause of irregularity, or even emotions can create that, right? You can have an emotion that can create an experience that's going to create a sense, and then you have that abnormality that occurs. The same thing happens with the brain. And I think that it's important for people to understand that we're really electrical beings. We're electrical currents. And that we have a relationship with energetic frequency, and that in that energetic frequency, a lot of times that's what we're picking up on from the other individuals around us as well, correct?
Yes.
So then you think about how can you establish, and so my question would be trauma in the effect. I think when the word trauma starts to enter the discussion in where that framework is at, as far as what trauma is really based in, then my question would be for the listeners is that when I think of trauma, you think of a catastrophic event that's just so horrendous that they put the label of trauma on it. But it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's that horrible, but someone will interpret it that way. Does that make sense? So it's the human being's interpretation of what that traumatic experience is, as far as where they look at it and how it creates chaos in their system. Maybe you can help to define that a little bit more succinctly than I just did. But I think it can be any type of event that throws that person out of synchrony, into disharmony, correct?
Yeah. Okay, so let me first go back to what you were saying before this. I always love to use the expression that we will always favor a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. Our nervous system. Yeah. So our nervous systems are always going to choose what it knows, even if it's not good for us. And this is why we also stay in our trauma cycles. So with regard to, so you're asking me, can I clarify what exactly is a trauma? Right? Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to a trauma is any situation in which it felt unsafe to be one's authentic self. So this it's often around emotional expression. So in a very subtle way, because we all know overt trauma. We know sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, which is not so easy to know because it's actually quite subtle. Crime, accidents, natural disasters, anything in which we feel that we are in danger or someone we love is in danger. So then it's a vicarious trauma. And then there's also collective trauma as well. which we see particularly where there are race issues and prejudice based on people's color, for instance, we can carry that collective trauma with us as well. And women carry a form of collective trauma from eons ago or years ago, where women were persecuted for various reasons. So there's also a collective trauma. But on a much more subtle level is this aspect of let's go back to a child. A child depends on grown-ups to provide security. If that child does not have the security, they may not live. They need someone who's going to provide shelter and food, but even more than that, emotional support. In fact, there are children in orphanages who are given the basics and then they have failure to thrive syndrome because they're not getting the emotional aspect of it. So that's also very important. So children at a very primal level know that if they do not receive certain aspects from those people around them, then they will not survive. So they are wired to make sure that they are loved, that they are enough, that they are accepted, that they belong. All of those things that mean that they will be okay and they will survive. And if they have received unconditional love, in other words, they realize when I have a temper tantrum, the people around me can't handle that. It either upsets them or this is in fact worse than parents who are angered by a child's temper are parents who shut down. Now, I always say, my father, it was like he closed a door on me. If I had an emotional response that he couldn't handle, he disappeared. He wasn't there anymore emotionally, and I could feel it. And that is abandonment. And it affects the nervous system. So I'm sure so many of your listeners can recall the feeling of a parent shutting down, the feeling of a parent shouting, and what happens in the body. There's a contraction. As soon as there's a contraction, that is a trauma response. It is a fear response. It means I'm not safe. Now, it's okay if we have this every now and then. It is the consistency of that. It is also the unpredictability of that. So there's definitely, you have to balance it with what other resources are in that child's environment. Do they have stable, loving caregivers as well? Obviously, some of the most debilitating childhood experiences can be with a parent who is an addict, because that's often very unpredictable parenting, inconsistent parenting. So as you can hear, I'm talking a lot around attachment patterns. And so this is really, it goes to attachment trauma. If we don't feel safe, we will not survive. It's because we believe on some level we won't survive because we'll be abandoned, rejected, or neglected. There's another part of this as well, is that most of the people I work with, I've realized and seen, are highly sensitive individuals. They have very sensitive nervous systems. They are very empathic. They feel things deeply around them. They are exceptionally impacted by the feelings and energy of others. Many of them are neurodivergent. And I actually believe that anyone with a sensitive nervous system can be labeled neurodivergent because they don't have that constant, stable, neurotypical nervous system. I can't say what comes first. I don't know if the trauma causes the sensitive nervous system, or if the sensitive nervous system makes them more predisposed to experiencing something as traumatic that another child may not. I think it's possibly a bit of both. Possibly they're already predisposed to be sensitive. They experience it in a way that is traumatic, and then that it makes the nervous system even more sensitive and dysregulated.
I think the other piece that you have to throw in that also is something that they're looking at in research, especially they're trying to figure out where autism is coming from, which is a pattern of neurodivergence, right? And so the other piece that I think is really very important to acknowledge is the hormonal system and how that plays a significant role. And that's where the adrenals come in, right? Because the adrenals are part of that hormonal system. So that when you start to think about that application of how the brain interacts and sends chemicals from the pituitary gland through the thyroid. There's a whole system of regulatory patterns that occur with the chemicals that are released in the body and sent to the adrenals. The adrenals respond because of the relationship with the activity or the, whatever the experience is that the human being is in. And so now they're starting to also identify the importance of that hormonal balance within the individual. And
100%.
oftentimes we're out of balance with our hormonal balances as well. And so it's important to really understand how that regulates our system as a part of this experience and how that gets triggered in the event of having maybe a traumatic event, correct? Because the body goes into a cascade of events in that relationship with the experience that you're having, and then it elicits all of these chemicals that are released into the body that have a flight or fight response, right? You're going to get that triggering of that effect. And so I think it's important to understand, and that's still coming down the pike as far as research, but the neurodivergence, I'm really grateful that they're starting to identify that there is that component in that, for a long time, and people were actually put into different mental institutions or whatever because they're not understood. And they're starting to understand that in that neurodivergency, that maybe there's another whole communication process that because we communicate in a certain way, that maybe these individuals are even at a higher level of communication of something that we don't understand. Right?
Yeah.
Which I find fascinating because that's where some of the research is going currently. So, are these autistic kids, are they telepathic? There was a study that was done. It's just, and it's our probably trying to categorize people and put them into a box that helps them to not be able to move through the human experience because they're being chastised or not understood. And so then they feel ostracized from the whole experience, the human experience, however that is. If it's the parental experience, that type of thing. That's occurring in the school, whatever it is. So you are developing another sense of trauma, right? Related to the way that you're engaging with the world at large because of that neurodivergent thinking. Correct?
Yes. Yeah. It's such an important piece. I think we use such a small percentage of our senses, our capacity of our senses. We have subtle senses. We have subtle sight, subtle hearing, subtle feeling. And as I've done my own healing process and connected back to my body, I've started to use my intuition a lot more. And my intuition, everyone's intuition is they're using their senses for intuition. So I suspect that neurodivergent or children that are further along the spectrum or adults are much more in touch with those aspects of themselves. But can you imagine living in this kind of a world that we're living in right now, when your senses are so honed and so sensitive? It must be incredibly overwhelming, and you can imagine why it's difficult for them to function properly. I remember when I was really battling with the worst of my fatigue and going into a shopping center, and it was so bright and so loud. And it's not because my senses my senses were sensitive for a different reason, not because I was so online, but just because my nervous system was so dysregulated. But yes, I suppose that again just speaks to that, how to have that degree of sensitivity and a regulated nervous system, and in the world that we currently live in.
And I think it's becoming, because of the speed that we're living at right now, because of the influence of, just the technology alone, just the introduction of all of the AI and all of the different influences that we have with social media and those types of things, that becomes a more difficult way to navigate through the world, because where's the authenticity in those experiences? Because we're losing a sense of that authenticity and that human connection and that spiritual sense. And so there's kind of a disconnect from that as well, is there not?
Yes. Disconnection is a major aspect. It's a major problem.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit, like you talk about hypnotherapy, but the BodyTalk piece, I would like to really share with the different people that may be listening to what that actually means. What is the modality of treatment, when you utilize BodyTalk, what are you actually tapping into in the body to help that person find a different way of healing? Because it is a methodology, a modality for healing, and it does go to another level of understanding with that body and how people can connect and have prior experiences that they may be able to navigate through to leave behind in the identification through that BodyTalk method, correct?
Yeah. So, okay. So our body-mind complex comprises our physical body, our emotional body, our mental state, our environment, which is both within and outside of ourselves, and it includes things like EMF and the energy of people around us and climate, and I feel like I've missed something. The energy flow within our body, and again around us as well. So all of these interact all the time and the way that they interact is going to determine the symptoms we feel. So if that is all in balance, we're going to feel healthy. But if it's out of balance, our body is going to start communicating through symptoms to let us know that there is an imbalance. And what unfortunately happens is we get an imbalance, like a headache, and then or let's say it's a chronic headache. So then we go to the doctor, and then the doctor addresses the physical, or actually probably just gives something to numb the symptom, and none of the other. Maybe this person has begun a new job in an environment where there is a lot of EMF, and the boss reminds them unconsciously of their abusive father, but they're not even yet aware that that's what's actually being triggered, and the presentation is a chronic headache. So with BodyTalk, we're asking the innate wisdom of the body. So this is the part that would normally say, whoa, there's an imbalance here, let's get it back into balance. Just the same way as when I get a cut, it forms a scab and heals over on its own. This is a natural capacity we have, and our innate wisdom is what addresses that and brings us back into homeostasis. But if there's too much going on and it's been going on for too long, it stops being recognized as an issue. And with the muscle testing, what we're doing is almost bringing that back into the awareness of innate to say, can you please balance this, address it, do what needs to be done? So it's not intellectual. And in fact, there are many times where I'll do a session and I don't understand what I've done, but I'm not meant to. And I always have to say to my clients, they say, but what does it mean? And I say, I don't know. And that's okay. You don't have to know either. It'll do what it needs to do. So that's the gist of it. What it's also doing is we have three brains. We have a head brain, a heart brain, and a gut brain. All of these three brains have an immune system component. They all produce neurotransmitters. In fact, the gut produces more dopamine and serotonin than the head by far. They all have their own intuitive aspect, but the gut is the most. So there's many similarities, but we focus on this one all the time. And they each have a role to play. The head brain will analyze, and it takes information from the past and says, is this in any way similar to anything that's happened in the past? Okay, yes, this looks like that, so this means I must respond in this way, which is great. If it's a hot oven and your brain says, oh, the last time I touched this, it was really sore, I mustn't do that. But it's not great if we're constantly scanning for potential threats and constantly finding potential threats and being on high alert all the time and constantly thinking all the time and analyzing everything to try and stay in control and safe. So ideally, we want to take that. We want to bring a little bit of this heart wisdom that says this feels good. It feels good. In other words, when I'm in the presence of this thing, or this thing is in my presence, I feel open and expanded. I don't go into contraction in my body. This is in alignment with my truth. We take that and we digest it, we process it, and we come up with a gut decision, which is where we use our intuition. And that's ideally what we would do. Most of us don't. With the BodyTalk, what we're also aiming to do is to integrate these three brains and to bring them all online at the same time.
I find it interesting because there's so much dysregulation in our gut health in the world today. And and I think that that's an important concept because they're really starting to understand and bring into scientific research and even medicine the importance of that microbiome in the gut, how it's so important to maintain a healthy gut because of the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve travels through the heart up to the brain, right? And so there's so much influence of that information that flows through that vagus nerve to the brain, through the heart, that really feeds the whole system to keep it integrated and synchronous, correct?
Yes.
So it's interesting because oftentimes, because of a disease process, because of an emotional reaction to a condition that we're experiencing, our guts get out of whack, right? Not only from the experience, if it's fear, if it's anger, whatever it is, plus the fact our food is inhibiting the way that we can process with that gut because it's not well cared for. I think it's interesting because from a Western medical perspective, we'll step in, somebody will present with what they call GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, right? And the first thing they're going to give them is some type of medication to decrease that supposed flow of burning that gets created from the gut to the esophagus. And they'll put them on what they call a proton pump inhibitor, some source of medication that actually distorts the ability for the microbiome to be able to process the way it's supposed to.
Yes.
And so it throws the body out of balance, right? You know, the gut's supposed to be in an acidic state, and when you start to change it, and then the body's supposed to be alkaline, right? But when you start to change the dynamics of that, you start to change the chemistry in the body, you're also misaligning that synchronous event between the gut, the brain, and the heart, right? Because you distorted it. And a lot of the influence, and I think it makes sense because when you start to think about disease, I do believe that disease comes from those emotional reactions that you have that are correlated with the dysregulation of the nervous system. Would you not agree?
Yes. So let's go back to BodyTalk. The guts. So every symptom is a communication, right? And so often we'll find that if a person has a particular problem with a particular body part, there's a consciousness of that. So if we battle to speak our truth, we might have thyroid or throat issues. Now, if you've got a stomach acid issue, there's often we're rejecting something. We're rejecting something in life. So my son, when he came along, had terrible reflux. I was a very anxious, exhausted, burnt out mother. I think I had a very fast milk flow as well. I think he was just rejecting the nourishment because he's a very sensitive child. So it was just too overwhelming for him. And he couldn't assimilate it. So if you just, again, it's digesting life. It's assimilating nourishment. It's how do we manage to receive and accept nourishment and nurturing in our lives? Or are we rejecting life because we don't trust life to actually nourish us? We're afraid that we're going to somehow have something negative happen. And so for me, it has so much to do with, again, early attachment patterns. And that links to the nervous system, which obviously then impacts the gut. And there's this whole story that's going on there. So I find it fascinating how many of the women that I see obviously will have gut issues related to their chronic fatigue, but they have issues related to the capacity to receive nourishment and nurturing. They are so busy giving to everyone else, they're never receiving it. And many of them have eating disorders. I was the same. I controlled my food intake because I didn't trust the nourishment. It was the one thing that I could control in my life, and because I didn't feel safe. And so I've had to walk a long journey around how to receive nourishment and nurturing in my life and how that's impacting my gut health.
Oh God, I love that.
And it goes further. There's there's the nervous system aspect. People who have IBS and chronic constipation, they are people who often are uptight and they hold on. So the gut can't let go. They battle to release, but that also goes hand in hand with sympathetic dominance. In other words, people who spend a lot of time in a chronically activated stress state. So that's also going to make the gut do this, the bowels, the colon just clench and not release so easy because we're holding on to everything to try and control it to feel safe. So that it all works together.
Yeah. This is such an enlightening and lovely conversation. I am just, I mean, it's just, it really, truly, I think it's really that connection that we don't, and oftentimes we're not connected to. We run around up here all the time and we're really not connected with this whole amazing entity that we're walking around in until there's a symptom that occurs. And then you have to identify, like you said, you go to the doctor gives you something for a headache, but that's not really what's happening. The body's trying to tell you something, right? And so it's when do you learn how to connect and listen to it that helps you to understand that you can cause an effect, a positive effect with the relationship with the body. And there's so many different aspects. But I agree with you 100% because women are, they're a lot, I think men too, men are protectors, right? They want to protect. And if they can't protect, they get into these whole states of control and whatever, because their role from a male perspective, whatever that means, is that, they're trying to do that to help other people. Where women, we give from our breasts, we give from, we're feeding our children and doing all of that and taking care of all of the responsibilities around us without self-nurturing, without really identifying that connection to self and that well-being that is really what we should be doing. I understand that completely. It takes a long time to understand that you are worthy of that, being able to receive that nourishment emotionally, physically, spiritually, nutritionally, that you can accept that and honor that in the process of all of this. And it's really fascinating. You're just wonderful, Miss Kerry. I love this conversation. I do.
I always love these kind of conversations.
Yeah, I am so glad that you're here on the summit, because I think that, part of it is this, that and I've worked in Western medicine, I worked in integrative medicine for a long time, but I've worked in Western medicine, was trained in Western medicine for, close to 40 years now. And when I look at that approach that we have, and both are needed, I'm not saying that we should separate, because sometimes Western medicine is definitely needed in the process of whatever the body needs to heal. But I also think that there's also an understanding that has to happen with the relationship with the body that isn't often or ever really truly identified, because we compartmentalize the body in Western medicine. We take a segment by a segment rather than integrating the whole. And that's where the difference is with a BodyTalk specialist or functional medicine doctor or an integrative practitioner, is you're really tapping into what the body's trying to tell you. It's interesting because I have a nutritional practice and I have done muscle testing for years, and people are mystified by it sometimes. When I imagine you run into that as well, that people, when you muscle test.
What's even more mystifying is that I do remote stations. So I'm not even with them. How do you know all of this? It's quite amazing.
And so I think it's interesting, but even in muscle testing them, even if they don't get into taking the nutritional products or whatever, you can see almost an aha from them, like an acknowledgement that they understand on an intuitive level that what you're doing with them is correct, right? It's working. And I think it's fascinating when you see that, and then you see them, they're going to only, it's like the old adage, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. I mean, you can educate, you can share, you can do whatever. And everyone takes what they need when they need it, if they can figure out that they need it. And I think that that's important to understand as well.
Yes.
But this has been, for me, an absolutely fascinating session. So thank you. Thank you very much. That this information is so important. And I think now people in the world are becoming more hungry for digestive tract. Anyway, hungry for the information that really needs to be identified in that healing process, because everybody heals in their own way, in their own time, in their own space. And there's no right or wrong way in any of this, correct? It's just when you're ready to embark on the journey of self-recognition, self-healing, honoring the self, which is a big thing. And I think that women, I don't know how the climate is in South Africa with women. Is it different than because I'm in the States, Is the climate different with women in South Africa? Is there something that's different, or is it, is it more judgmental? Is it more accepting? What is your
Oh,
climate?
you mean how women relate to each other?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely still that sisterhood aspect of the underlying comparisons that happen. But at the same time, in South Africa in general, people are very resilient. And there's a strong capacity to come together in times of difficulty. So that also is where women are very powerful in South Africa when they come together like that.
I think that's true. I think that's the beauty of sisterhood throughout the world.
Yes.
I mean, that collective feminine energy is a powerful source.
I could go down an entire rabbit hole with you about what patriarchy has done to the feminine and how we all live in distorted masculine. And yes, there's so much there. And women have been kept small because we are powerful. We are so powerful.
Yeah.
Yes.
I totally agree with you. And I think in some respects, a lot of the chest thumping that we're experiencing currently, that it is an interesting time because, again, there's more kind of direction in the oppression of that feminine energy. And I think the interesting thing to recognize that people don't really understand in many aspects is we have both energies in our body. We are both male and female energy, right? Both of in our systems, we have the ability, and that's important as well to understand that to be whole, you have to have both systems in balance, right?
Yes.
This is just a quick interruption to let you know about a free masterclass that I'm running next week on the 11th of December, where I'll be sharing more about the masculine and feminine energy that we all hold within us, and how this balance is so very important to our vitality, our health, our well-being, and our general capacity to thrive. Most of us are disconnected from our feminine energy, so learning what this is and how to rekindle that relationship with the feminine is very, very powerful. The link is in the show notes for this podcast.
I mean, we even have male hormones. Women have testosterone in our bodies. We have DHEA, which regulates all of that and helps to drive the sex hormones and all that kind of stuff. Just like with men, we don't have as much, but we still have that hormonal product in our body that also helps us to regulate as well. And so I think it's interesting, but yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you as far as female energy and the power of sisterhood and the power of the voice that needs to come out from the women in the world at large, because I think our energy is very balancing and health.
So I would love to end this with that, is that instead of making our...
This is just a quick interruption to let you know about a free masterclass that I'm running next week on the 11th of December, where I'll be sharing more about the masculine and feminine energy that we all hold within us, and how this balance is so very important to our vitality, our health, our well-being, and our general capacity to thrive. Most of us are disconnected from our feminine energy, so learning what this is and how to rekindle that relationship with the feminine is very, very powerful. The link is in the show notes for this podcast.
Health issues, something bad, can it rather be an opportunity? Because this is what I'm seeing over and over again with the women I work with, is that as we consciously work with what is out of balance and discover who we actually truly are when we are not adapting ourselves and when our nervous system is rested and calm, we then step into that truth and that power that is so incredible. And imagine all of us doing that together, how powerful that would be. So letting chronic fatigue, chronic overwhelm, chronic stress, chronic health issues be an opportunity to discover what's out of balance and to consciously bring it back into balance.
Gosh, I'm so glad you're here. I mean, it's just I just am really grateful because, I was thrilled when you actually reached out to me, and then we started to go through the whole introductory phase of all of this. And I think that's one of the most inspiring pieces of why I get to do this, because I want the message to go out into the world to bring this energy of harmony. And, there's a perceived toxic positivity, but that's not what this is about. This is about inspiration. This is about really being able to generate energy out into the world that's hopeful and peaceful and filled with love, because we have that. And as women, we give that, usually without any barrier, sometimes too much, like you said, if we're a people pleaser, you have to be careful about where that balance is. But I really want this summit to go out into the world to help people find balance within their own systems. And if they're not, to understand what that dysregulation may be about and how it can be a symptom to help you understand that it is an opportunity. So I love that you closed with that. That's lovely. Yeah. Yeah. So I am incredibly grateful you're here and a part of this process. And thank you for spending the time with me.
Thank you for creating this summit and for this opportunity. It is so needed, and I really appreciate being able to be involved.
Well, we'll just keep sending the messages out, because I think that's what's important. And I probably get a calling to do this. So it's like you just keep following that process and that path. And the important thing is that there are incredible people like yourself throughout the world that are doing the work to help people heal and find their own empowerment within their own beings, right? So thank you for being one of those people that listened to their own symptoms and heard the calling.
Yeah.
So thank you.
And you too.
Yeah. Thank you. You have a fabulous rest of the week, and I will look forward to talking to you soon. And thank you.
Before you go, do you want to find out if your personality might be keeping you stuck in fatigue or burnout? As a psychologist and BodyTalk practitioner, I've seen a clear link between certain psychological patterns and chronic fatigue and exhaustion. That's why I created a quick 5-minute quiz to help you discover if you resonate with what I call the holding personality, a set of traits that I've found common in many of my clients struggling with fatigue, and characteristics that keep them stuck and depleted. So head over to kerrymagnus.net, that's no www, just kerrymagnus.net, and click Start Here to take the quiz. It might just be the missing piece you're looking for.